Age of Overlord has finally hit the TCG, and that means 100 new cards, new themes, and legacy support for duels to test out. It also means a meta shakeup. What better time to dive into the competitive landscape and give my take on the top contenders post Age of Overlord. I'll only commit to what I believe are the 5 best decks of the new format, although I may throw in an honorable mention. No need to beat around the bush anymore. Number 5, Vanquished Soul. Honestly, I kinda wanna put this deck higher, but then everyone will be like, Cap, you love Vanquished Soul, you're being a fanboy, you're completely biased, blah blah blah. A fanboy? Maybe, but biased? Also maybe. In all seriousness, despite how much the community absolutely loves the dunk on my beloved deck, it's performed pretty well competitively, all things considered. Vanquished Soul picks up a new monster, Jiaolong, and Agave, which really helps the deck snowball completely out of control in the early game. This is especially true if the versus duelist also has access to Burger, because then you're potentially talking about them getting 2 searches and 2 draws before their opponent even hits their main phase. I think Vanquished Soul is going to slide into the role that Fluwandereeze filled late last format, essentially the anti-meta or stunish meta deck. Say what you like about the cards, but the methods are highly effective, as VS can easily main deck Dimension Shifter, and there can be only one, while also having 1 card access to powerhouse extra deck floodgate monsters like Baguska and Abyss Dweller. These all combine to make matchups like Unchained, Terra Elements, and Purely far easier to manage. People often like to comment, actually Cap G, Vanquished Soul only wins because of cheap and skillless floodgates. My response to that is, and these cards are legal and they're highly effective, so obviously we're going to use them, and honestly, hell will freeze over before any Versus player feels bad because they won using any of these cards. Because of Rock, Versus has one of the strongest grind games in all of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, but sometimes it can get blown out of the water in the early game and completely overwhelmed before it has time to slow the duel down. Number 4, Pearly. Pearly had an atrocious showing at YCS Dortmund a few weeks ago. At least that's what people initially thought, because Konami randomly added it to the other section of the top cut rather than categorizing it by itself. In actuality, it had a solid performance and remains a very good meta deck. Pearly right now is in a pretty good position, as it's a fairly strong deck going first or second. Pearly doesn't need to play hand traps at all, and instead can rather opt into the package of 6 tactics cards, simply discarding them for memory spells if they go first, while having their awesome board breaking power when playing second. Pearly still has arguably the most powerful boss monster in the entire metagame in X Pearly Noir, as well as one of the most powerful opening plays with the dreaded Sleepy Draw 6 into one of those Noirs. This play is almost auto win against every single deck in the metagame, because once it goes off, the absolute avalanche of card advantage and disruption it generates is pretty much going to be good against everything you play against. Furthermore, it's likely that this play is going to be more successful moving forward, with the book card seemingly less popular thanks to Kashtira and its removal from the metagame. I also think that Dimensional Barrier is going to see less side deck play because it barely stops Terra Element at all, and isn't super great against what I believe are going to be the top decks, and even some of the lower tier ones that always seem to perform well, like Fluwandereeze and Rika. Less D-barrier in the format means less auto losses for the cat deck. Number 3, Unchained, or Unchained Soul, I guess if you want to get technical. YCS Dortmund notwithstanding, I think it's pretty fair to say that prior to Age of Overlord, Unchained was the best deck and the one with the target on its back. But this deck didn't really get better with the release of the newest core booster sets. Unchained definitely is the most consistent deck on this list, at least in my opinion, because there's absolutely no RNG, there's very few true bricks that the deck has to run, and it has very little reliance on seeing a specific card to combo. This is of course all bolstered by the deck's ability to play 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity in the main deck, as well as the fact that it doesn't need to run any hand traps. Its standard inboard is still strong and good enough to hold up against most of the meta decks, with disruption being diversified as it comes by the way of monsters as well as back row that actually floats into more monsters if destroyed. Unchained is also one of the few decks that has searchable spell and trap removal in the way of a spell and trap as part of its standard opening play, which is actually kind of incredible when you think about a format that might have cards like King's Sarcophagus and some of the common field spells that you see in the Visas lore. I think that Unchained is going to benefit from the removal of some of the targeted counter cards that we saw rise in popularity over the past couple of months. Cards like Fantastical Dragon Phantasme and Marionette might, which in my opinion will definitely not be in many side decks moving forward. I think my biggest concern with Unchained is the tier element matchup, where it seems like it just kind of gets run over, and the fact that tier elements can easily make Abyss Dweller is probably just going to make things a lot worse. Hopefully Unchained players will be able to find an answer to this. Number 2, Rescue Ace. So me putting Rescue Ace here is either going to look completely brilliant or moronic in about a month, because this deck is as combustible as the fires that the Rescue Ace monsters are supposed to be putting out. We all know that Turbulence is an absolutely insane boss monster that allows a player to go +4, get multiple disruptions, extenders, and link into bigger plays that can create even more advantage. The problem with this deck is that the consistency, it just freaking sucks in that regard. Because for the most part, Rescue Ace really only have Hydrant and Airlifter to get to said boss monster and those really OP opening turns. Both cards can just be stopped by the likes of low impact hand traps, cards like Ash Blossom and Infinite Impermanence, and sometimes those cards can downright stop their turns. In addition, Rescue Ace has often struggled with drawing the spells and traps that you want to set from your deck off Turbulence, and those cards just being blank cards in your opening hand. This is made especially worse when you go second. But now the deck has access to the Diabella Star engine, which should alleviate most of the consistency problems. This engine gives the deck more ways to get to its best starter and Rescue Ace Hydrant, a way to get dead cards out of the hand, and a way to make synchro monsters like Baron de Flor and Overlord Savage Dragon as part of your turn 1 board, which of course makes playing through Turbulence's effect infinitely more difficult because now you don't lose the cards like Evenly Match. There's also the super degenerate Ibli Lock, which I would completely commit to if I was playing this deck. This turns off cards like Lightning Storm and the aforementioned Evenly Match, and basically puts your opponent on have a tribute summon, play Lingaribo, or just basically enjoy not special summoning for this turn. There's a good chance that I put this deck too high, but usually when you make these type of lists, you have to go out on a limb. My honorable mention is Mannadium. Whose idea was it to have this entire stupid lore work within one deck? Well, whoever that person was, I'm sure they're happy every time they see someone play this theme. Mannadium is insanely powerful. In fact, I think that its ceiling is just as high as Tier Elements. It can make a board with just as many disruptions, has a searchable Infernity Barrier trap card as part of its inboard, gets free removal from its field spell, shakes off D-Barrier like nobody's business, and it just never seems to stop searching cards. That being said, I'm not sure that enough people will actually commit to this deck in the numbers that it'll take for this deck to have an impressive YCS showing. YCS Dortmund appeared to be somewhat of a coming out party of sorts for the deck, but the Visas cards in Agave aren't nearly as impactful as the ones from Dune, so players may not be drawn to it. For anyone who likes big combo with no RNG, I actually think that this could be the sleeper deck of the format, although maybe I'm being a little too influenced by Triff Gaming, who has been tearing it up with this deck lately, including a complete dominating duel of tier elements that made Mannadium genuinely look like the best deck of the format. And finally, to our number 1, Tier Element. I actually thought that Tier was going to be Tier 1 going into YCS Dortmund, and that it was a really good pick for the event. Look, it's simple. King Arise Hearts and Kashtira completely suppress Tier's ability to, well, basically exist, and with those out of the way, combined with the never should have been created as Shizu cards, which are all still completely legal in the TCG, for some reason, Tier is not only insanely difficult to stop, but it's easily the most versatile deck in our metagame right now. This deck can not only blow you out of the water in terms of card advantage by hitting a mill 5, but it can also make heaps of disruption and omni negations with cards like Baron de Flor, Totally Awesome, Tier Element Scrime, and Graph of Fusion, all while backed by even more disruption with Tier Element Sulliak, Queen Rakalos, Tier Rhino Heart, SP Little Knight, and pops from Perla Rhino. Tier is strong going first and second, easily plays through a ton of hand traps, and while at the same time can set up a board that is strong enough that most meta decks can't beat it. The consistency of this deck is sky high, and if you don't play the Horse engine, there are very few flaws within Tier Elements right now, outside of I guess it having probably not the strongest grind game, but a lot of big combo decks are kind of like that. Honestly, I think that Tier Elements is the deck to beat right now, and I think it's going to be the deck that shapes the meta the most. Anyways, those are just my picks, and I want to know what you guys think of my picks, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments in the comment section where people say, Cap, that deck shouldn't have been on there, or that's not the top deck, etc, etc. You guys leave that all in the comment section below. Feel free to put your top 5, or again, if you think that I made an egregious error. Anyways, thank you guys for watching as always.